Today I will give you some of my tips and tricks and some information on how to strengthen your immune system, especially now during winter time, but also if you train a lot, even during summertime, regardless of what time of year that is, depending on whether you're in the northern or the southern hemisphere. Of course, if you train often and train hard, that can also weaken your immune system and then start interfering with your training. So today will be some of the tips and tricks that I give out to people in general during winter, but also share with a lot of the top athletes and top business executives I work with to make sure that we have as little downtime as possible due to illness. So my secrets to strengthening your immune system. And as Kate mentioned, my name is Umahro Cadogan. I'm a former adjunct professor in nutrition and functional medicine. I work with the Functional Sports Nutrition Academy and work with peak performance, and also a best-selling author here in Denmark. But enough about me. So, what we're going to talk about today, first I'll tell you like a 101 quick guide to the immune system, how it works and the information you need in able to understand what you can do and why winter time or high training volume, high volume training, or just a very busy lifestyle can impact your immune system. Then we'll look at how diet and lifestyle has an impact on your immune system, for better or worse. And then I'll talk you through some of the supplements and nutrients that can be beneficial, both as in a preventive point of view, so what might make sense to take during winter time or if you're under pressure, and also what things might be able to help you once you have some sort of illness. And of course, the immune strengthening I'm going to talk about here today is a sort of immune strengthening that's relevant for minor illnesses. So this is not what will help prevent tuberculosis or Ebola or anything like that. We're looking at what you can do in terms of colds, in terms of the flu, in terms of sore throat, and there's milder infections like that. So let's get started with the immune system. So your 101 guide to the immune system. So what does your immune system do? Really, the immune system is designed to help you identify strangers, so to speak, and then decide whether they have to be eliminated or okay. So your immune system constantly scans all your surfaces, skin, and all mucous membranes. So mucous membranes in your mouth, in your throat, in your lungs, in your ears, in your nose, and especially in your digestive system, and also all your skin and mucous membranes, obviously in your bladder and so forth. So your immune system is constantly scouting, so to speak, taking little environmental samples. So you literally have these cells called dendrites that take little snippets of whatever they can get hold of that happens to be in contact with all your surface areas, and then they will take that info, those snippets, those environmental samples back to the T cells that are sort of the generals in the immune system, and together they will decide on whether this is friend or foe or stranger, and if it happens to be a stranger, whether that should just be left alone, so the immune system will exhibit tolerance, or whether that happens to be something dangerous that has to be killed or eliminated with an immune response, so you get inflammation. And of course, your immune system also does the same inside your body, so it also helps finding misbehaving cells that would be cancer cells or precancerous cells. And on top of that, it actually also has a job as a sort of garbage collector. So your immune system also has to help break down old dead cells, worn out tissue from aging, from movement, from physical activity, whether that's training or job related because you happen to be a lumberjack or have some sort of other manual labor. So your immune system is actually quite busy, even when there's nothing wrong, everything's working. It has quite a lot to do. And if your immune system is not working, or if it gets out of balance, so to speak, the systemic effects can be quite profound. But this identifying strangers and deciding whether they have to be eliminated or okay actually takes up quite a lot of your immune capacity. So a lot of people probably think that the most important role for the immune system is to attack, but in fact the most important role for the immune system is to be able to exhibit tolerance and not attack all these things. But if your immune system were to react to every single foreign molecule it encountered, you would be dead from inflammation within 5 minutes after birth. And as a sort of side note, part of what's happening when you look at allergies, asthma, eczema, and so forth, hay fever, it's actually an instance where the immune system somehow gets off on the wrong path, on the wrong foot in terms of not identifying strangers, but it's deciding whether they should be left alone or not. So when you have all these allergic reactions and inflammation with asthma or eczema or hay fever in response to hay or foods you eat or dust and dust mites and so forth, it's actually a case of the immune system doing the initial part right, identifying some stranger, but then getting it absolutely wrong, subsequently saying, okay, that's a stranger, so we must attack, we must eliminate it with the sort of methods available, rather than saying, hey, pollen, yes, not part of the human body, not part of you, but who cares? I mean, it'd be a waste of time using all that energy and having inflammation that has all these consequences for well-being and health to get rid of pollen that really doesn't do anything bad to you. Now, we would say that your immune system has sort of 3 parts, or you would call it 3 segments. So, sorry, if one time too early, let's go back. So the first part, where you can see, and that's why we have like 3 parts, we have the shield, so that's what we call barrier function. So your immune system, initially the first thing that will protect you are actually all your barriers. So your skin, your mucous membranes are literally designed to keep bacteria out and at bay, and also the reason that we get slime in all our membranes, so to speak, you know, snot and so forth, and the reason that if you actually get inflammation or get a cold, there's going to be more slime secreted is that's literally an attempt to wash away all these microbes that your immune system doesn't want around and would literally like to get them caught up in this gunk and then wash them away. So you have all these membranes and all these, also your skin, of course, that's a sort of physical barrier designed to trap, slow down, and keep out potential microbial invaders. And on top of that, along all these membranes, you have what's called innate immunity. So your immune system is capable of responding off the bat when it encounters bacteria and things like that. So without having to give much thought or attention to it, all the cells in that control the surface of your immune system have to actually have what are called toll-like receptors. So they're literally molecules on their surface that will automatically be triggered if they get into contact with pathogenic bacteria or microbes, so things that are dangerous. Then the immune cells that are scouting along your surfaces will be auto-triggered to attack and try to kill these cells. So obviously when it comes to your defense against more benign infections like the flu, sore throat, cold, mild pneumonia, barrier function is really important, because if your barrier function is working, then it will be harder for all these microbes to gain a foothold, because physically they won't actually be able to get there. There will be skin in the way, or the mucous membrane with slime that they literally get caught up. It's like, imagine if someone were to simply encase you in a block of semi-liquid jello that would sort of run off. You'd be hard-pressed to do anything. And then you have all these immune cells that are auto-triggered to try to either literally burn or engulf all these foreign bacteria and microbes. So that's innate immunity, and that's the first part of the immune response, or protective capacity, and that obviously has to happen right off the bat. So if barrier function is down, that on its own becomes a massive problem, but also if your immune system gets the part wrong with hyper responding to all these foreign things it will encounter that are not self in the environment, then of course you get the opposite problem where you have constant inflammation for no reason. So imagine that every time someone at the border patrol sees something foreign, they literally firebomb the whole place just out of fear. So it's a fine, delicate balance. You don't want weakened innate immunity. You definitely want all the barriers strong, and I'll get to some of the things that have an impact on that. But with the innate immune response, you want it strong enough to be able to immediately repel invaders so they won't get a foothold or be able to sneak around and plan and plot. But you do not want innate immunity to freak out about irrelevant things, so to speak. We have that part of the immune response. Then you also have what's called the cellular immune response, or cellular immunity, and that's the second part where the immune system will literally commandeer immune cells. So you can think of them as troops or troopers that literally try to go and fight these cells, these microbes one-to-one. So the cellular immunity is also quite important, because that's where your immune system will send out the troops and try to kill the invaders. And of course, cellular immune response is also very important in terms of cancer, because it's actually through the cellular immune response your immune system They literally try to kill cancer cells. And that's also part of the immune response used for dealing with dead, worn out, and old tissue. And then you have what's called the humoral immune response. Humoral not because it has anything to do with humor, but from the Latin word humor, or humor, which is about something in liquids. So that's also the antibody response. So part of what your immune system will do once something's triggered in the surface, or once some of all these scouts have come back with a snippet of a foreign bacteria, if your immune system then decides it's dangerous, is obviously just tell all the truth. If you see anything like that attack upon sight, that is cellular immunity, but your immune system will also begin creating antibodies. So it will literally create molecules that circulate in your bloodstream and in your mucous membranes and in your skin that are designed to latch on to whatever bacteria or whatever foreign molecule they were built to interact with, to either destroy it or literally light it up for the immune system's attention. So these two parts, second two parts, cellular immunity and humoral immunity, or the antibody response, they're kind of delayed. But of course, they're also the reason that once you've encountered an infection one time, you become, if not immune at least, you become better dealing with it subsequently. So the reason vaccines are given is that you trigger an antibody response, when vaccines work, that is, and then those antibodies, you'll produce those permanently. So the next time you encounter that pathogenic microbe, say if you've been vaccinated against diphtheria, which is a bacterial infection, then you've already created antibodies that will immediately latch onto this bacteria and kill it both in the surfaces, so skin, mucous membranes, whether they're external or internal, but also inside your body, so you can clear that quicker. So the cellular immune response and the antibody immune response, they give you an extra boost once you've encountered an infection one time, provided your immune system figures it out. Now, in the best case scenario, when things work, you have strong barriers. So skin and mucous membranes are strong and resilient, so invaders that would like to get entry into your body won't even get there because they can't get past the barrier. Then you would have a vigilant, immediate, and effective non-specific immune response. So even if some sort of virus or bacteria or parasite or yeast manages to latch on or lodge in some surface, whether that's in your throat, in your lungs, in your eyes, in your ears, in your sinuses, or your digestive system, your skin, then the non-specific immune response immediately kicks in and starts killing these foreign invaders on sight. So they're literally eaten and burned. And then the specific immune response is quickly coded or encoded. So on top of that, you'll start producing antibodies that literally target these foreign invaders, both in the surface, but also some of them manage to actually get into your tissues, into your bloodstream. These antibodies will be everywhere, and they will immediately latch on to the foreign invader and neutralize them or kill them, or at least it will be like the special forces somewhere with a laser pointer pointing on to whatever target a smart bomb has to hit. And then with the cellular immune response, your immune system will also immediately start commandeering immune cells that specifically go to find the enemy both in the surface and within and kill them in hand-to-hand combat, so to speak. But you'll also get proper resolution, meaning that once that's over, once you get rid of the invaders, you kill them, then you have resolution, so the immune response ends and the inflammation ends in a timely manner and completely. Because if you can't really stop inflammation, you can actually get into these situations where even long after the initial invader or trigger has been dealt with, if your immune regulation is poor, then you have chronic inflammation. So it's almost like a country that doesn't realize it's no longer at war, but will still be in a state of emergency. And that, of course, costs way too much. So in the best case scenario, this happens. And nutrition and general health actually has quite an impact on this. So eating a healthier diet, making sure you get enough certain nutrients, making sure you get enough sleep, that you're not overly stressed, that you exercise, but that you're not overtraining, that all helps create an environment where it's much easier for your body to maintain the barrier. The outside barriers, it's much better or easier for your immune system to have this vigilant, immediate, and effective non-specific immune response, quickly code the specific immune response, and then have the solution afterwards. You won't have chronic inflammation, which is like a fire that you can't put out that does damage long after it burns whatever you're supposed to get rid of. But in the worst case scenario, you have poor barrier function, so your mucous membranes and skin are weak in the sense that they allow foreigners to, unwanted foreigners that is, to settle and start causing damage and literally causing an infection. Then you have a sloppy, non-specific immune response, so your immediate ability to repel the invaders with immune cells that will try to eat them or burn them is weakened. And the specific immune response is coded improperly, either too slowly or too aggressively, so your immune system will start not just attacking whatever bacteria or viral infection you're dealing with, but also you'll have extensive collateral damage. And then you get chronic systemic inflammation without the ability to repel the invaders. So what can also happen is that if you get these bacteria or microbes that settle somewhere that you can't quite kill or get rid of, then your immune system will still go from DEFCON 1 to DEFCON 5 and be in battle mode with all the effects that chronic systemic inflammation has on health, which are not good long term. But so you'll never settle. So you'll have the worst of both worlds. You'll have the infection there or the invader that you can't quite get rid of or clear, and at the same time, you'll still have a whole body and whole physiology in a state of emergency, which will cost you. So that's really, to make it very simple, that's what the immune system has to do and what needs to happen when we're looking at all these more benign or basic infections people get during winter time, or if they get cold even in summertime, if you're out about in nature and you can't keep warm because you're not properly dressed for hiking, or you fall into a stream and get really cold and so forth. Or if you actually overtrain, you push yourself too hard, then you'll go to the second scenario. So we know that there are some dietary and lifestyle changes that are important to improve immunity and prevent the second scenario from happening. So first of all, you want to eat healthy food. And part of that would be to eat really, really large amounts of vegetables, berries, fruits, spices, and herbs. So eat a rainbow. Literally think of eating a whole rainbow of food. Not like you'll get every single color of M&Ms or Skittles, but a rainbow in plant foods. All these colorful color pigments you find in plant foods, they actually are immune strengthening. A lot of these carotenoids that are yellow, orange, pinkish, reddish, purple, they can be converted into vitamin A, which happens to be important both for barrier function and innate immunity. So we can see that people who get these 600 grams or 6 servings of vegetables, berries, and fruits a day and make sure they get that whole color spectrum, their immune system works way better. And a couple of years back, I was involved in doing a pilot study in a nursing home. And the intervention we chose to do was to actually give half the members of the nursing home, half of the residents, we gave them 3 glasses of freshly pressed vegetable and fruit juice every day. And that on its own decreased the number of upper airway respiratory infections by 50% over a winter, simply because we were making sure we were getting all these plant foods and all these lovely things you find in vegetables, berries, and fruits, vitamin C, other vitamins and minerals, and also all these bioflavonoids, all these color pigments. Then healthy fats are really important. So the type of fat you eat actually has quite an impact on how your immune system works and also on your mucous membranes. So making sure you get enough omega-3 fatty acids is important to make sure you don't get that situation with excessive inflammation where your immune system will literally make your whole body convert into a state of emergency at the cost of your health and well-being in the long term. You also want to make sure you get some omega-6 fatty acids, right? They've been sort of maligned as evil and detrimental and damaging. But actually, omega-6 fatty acids are important to be able to mount an immune response. So completely cutting out of omega-6 fatty acids in your food would cause a problem with immune suppression or an inability to react to infections. And I've actually seen clients in my practice who thought, okay, I've been eating really large amounts of omega-6 fatty acids through lots of refined vegetable oils and vegetable fats and lots of red meat from animals that were fed grains and or in grass-fed. So I'll cut out all omega-6s, and then I'll eat omega-3s only. And that worked wonderfully for them initially, but after 6 to 9 months, they actually started getting some new issues, especially a weakened immune response, because now they were lacking enough omega-6 fatty acids to actually initiate inflammation to repel invaders. So healthy fats quite important. And there also seems to be an emergent story that some of the saturated fats are important for immune function. So especially some of the medium chain saturated fats you find in coconut oil, they probably have a mild to moderate effect on your immune system. So sometimes you hear these stories, if you eat coconut oil, that will literally kill all parasites in your body, and people get really wild and outrageous. They say, oh, eat coconut oil and it will cure HIV or deal with AIDS, which of course is utter nonsense. But some of these fats that you find in coconut oil, but you'll also find some amount of in milk fats and dairy fats, especially if the animals are grass-fed, they actually do have mild immune stimulating properties and also mild antimicrobial properties. So that would be beneficial. And then you have to consider your carbohydrates as well, because if you eat excessive amounts of refined carbohydrates, that seems to have a negative impact on your immune system as well. So I'm not saying a no-carb diet, but if you eat too large amounts of refined sugar and refined starch, that can actually have a negative impact on your immune system. So what will happen if you eat too much of it? And that, of course, what's too much really differs from person to person. But probably the general person in a modern industrialized society happens to eat way too many of these refined carbohydrates. They will push chronic inflammation. So you will get that sort of smoldering fire you cannot put out. But at the same time, that also seems to weaken your specific, your cellular immune response and your innate immune response. Probably part of the reason being that vitamin C is really important for immune cells to function, but you actually transport glucose and vitamin C through the same transporters in cells. So if you eat really, really large amounts of refined carbohydrates without metabolizing them because you're in the midst of a CrossFit workout or a marathon or a triathlon or something to that effect, then all that glucose will compete with vitamin C for entry into your white blood cells. So you'll get local vitamin C deficiency, or at least greatly decreased levels of vitamin C. They're really important for white blood cells to be able to survive when they attack. So the kind of bonfire, the aggressiveness with which they attack once they're tuned in, keyed in, turned on, and have initiated inflammation, means they have to protect themselves, otherwise they'll literally burn up in their own fire. And vitamin C is important for that. And that's also why eating like a rainbow and getting all these bioflavonoids is really important, because they actually help protect immune cells so they're able to withstand the sort of damage they incur on the cells they want to kill without dying themselves. It's sort of, you can almost say that it's a kind of fireproofing so they can survive the harsh environment they create. Imagine if you had firefighters that did not have the right equipment, simply did not have the suits they wear that are flame retardant, so they won't catch fire, that are temperature regulating and so forth. They would, once they tried to put out a fire, they would die in the process. So we can see that an excessive intake of refined carbohydrates has, again, pushes you towards this worst case scenario with poor barrier function, poor innate immunity, but increased systemic inflammation. So food, certainly important. And if we look at foods that are specifically immune boosting, that have an impact, we know that garlic is really important. So garlic has specific effects. All these root vegetables, carrots, beets, parsnips, parsley root, and also things like pumpkin, which is not quite a root vegetable, but all these foods that have these orange, yellow, red color pigments, they're strengthening for the immune system because that can be converted into vitamin A and helps protect immune cells when they have to fight. All the citrus fruits, so oranges, lemons, tangerines, grapefruit, lime, so forth, they also have a lot of beneficial effects for the immune system. In terms of the vitamin C they contain, that's one thing, but not all. They also often contain other plant molecules that will help protect or prolong the life of vitamin C. So that's beneficial. We know that ginger It's beneficial because it can help dampen excessive inflammation. Mushrooms, also button mushrooms, portobello mushrooms, shiitake, maitake, reishi, all these mushrooms, they contain beta-glucans that stimulate the innate immune response and the cellular immune response, so making sure you eat those makes sense. And fermented dairy products also have beneficial effects because all the beneficial gut bacteria you get in fermented dairy products, one, will help maintain your gut flora if you have to take antibiotics, and making sure you have the right gut bacteria also has a massive impact on the immune system. When you have a balanced, abundant, very diverse gut microflora, that will help strengthen your immune system but prevent inflammation. And then all these Mediterranean spices, so rosemary, thyme, oregano, sage, basil, and so forth, they also are beneficial for the immune system because a lot of the essential oils they contain, that also based on the oils you can smell, they will actually be antimicrobial. So if you go back and look at a lot of the folk medicine traditions from different parts of the world, using some of these quite strong herbs would be the only thing they had when people had infections. And on top of garlic, some of the other onion, other vegetables in the onion family, so things like onions, chives, and so forth, they work as well. Back in the day in Denmark, if people had a sore throat, apart from eating garlic and onions, or if they had a chest infection, what people would actually do would be to take lots of onions or garlic or leeks, chop them roughly, and put them around people's beds so they would be breathing in all these fumes or all these aromatic molecules that also give a particular and distinct smell. And sometimes that helps a bit. Of course, I'm not saying, oh, just crush garlic and breathe in with the smell and that would cure your pneumonia. By no means. But if you add these foods to an already healthy diet, there certainly can be an effect. They all have their role and all have some sort of beneficial effect, especially against the background of health. In terms of lifestyle, you know that sleep has an impact, exercise and movement, basic hygiene, not to, so a lot of these very banal infections we get during winter time, colds and so forth, we can actually reduce the transmission rate simply by making sure that we are hygienic, so making sure we wash our hands, that we go to a buffet, that we actually wipe our hands with something disinfectant beforehand, afterwards. So just by making sure that you keep clean, that you wipe your hands, and do it often, that will actually help lower transmission rates. So if you think about it, what's the usual situation in some sort of daycare facility, not nursing home, but like kindergarten or nursery, right? We have all these little children, they're closely together, they probably aren't thinking about washing their hands all the time and wiping the doorknob and washing their hands before they go and grab food from a plate or a tray that someone else will eat off, and make sure that they cover their mouth when they cough. And during winter time, you just have colds and the flu and things like that all over. So hygiene and stress, of course, is pretty important, and so is your physical environment. So once you are in a place that's very cold, that creates, and also if it's very dry, that actually creates a situation that's beneficial to the transmission of all these infections, whether they happen to be bacterial or viral. And that's one of the reasons why when we live in tropical environments, we don't see this seasonal variation in colds and so forth, because since it's hot all the time, that creates an environment where all these basic infections do not thrive very well. There can then be other more serious infections that find this is paradise, and also you won't be chilled, so when you're cold, especially when your surface areas get cold, that interferes with innate immunity, and that's one of the reasons why if you really freeze your head and your face, you're more likely to get a sinus infection or catch a cold, because whilst you're cold, your innate immunity in all those areas is actually impaired and weakened. If you look at sleep, you should, if you get less than 7 hours of sleep per night, that interferes with your immune functioning. So make sure you get enough sleep in general, but if you want to avoid increasing your risk of all these wintertime infections, make sure you get at least 7 hours of sleep per night most days of the week. Once you go below that, you can actually see that infection rate goes up. Also for more serious things, although I'm not saying, well, if you get enough sleep, then you could breathe Ebola and nothing would happen. Of course you would, because it's a very serious infection. And sleep deprivation increases the susceptibility to infection, but it also worsens inflammation. So that night you get an infection, then your immune system decides, okay, it's time to fight back. So now you get inflammation, you get a fever, you feel miserable, but the inflammatory response is greatly amplified. So you suffer more whilst you're trying to deal with the infection. Not a very good idea. With stress, we know that also interferes with immune functioning. So long-term stress, so if you're overloaded with stress, that increases your susceptibility. And sometimes you'll also see that people who are recovering from stress still have increased susceptibility to infections and disease. And it can take as much as up to 4 times as long to recover from stress overloading collapse as it took to get there. So you really have to look at your stress levels as well. If you're under a lot of pressure, even if you do not get to the point of stress collapse or clinical stress where a business psychologist or a psychiatrist would say, you're stressed, you need to go home, relax, and really chill out for a while. You still see that people are just under a lot of pressure if they do not look out, if they're not careful. That can increase their risk of infection, of cold, sinus infection, and so forth. And in terms of training and physical activity, both too little and too much training interferes with immune functioning. So people who do not train at all actually have poor immune functioning that they ought to have. But of course, overtraining also creates this massive and immense overload on your body, which will also interfere with immunity. That's one reason why a lot of the top athletes I work with, who actually are very, very careful in managing recovery and making sure that they recover sufficiently compared to the massive or sometimes crazy amount and volume and intensity of training they have to endure, and also what they have to go through during competition. Because if you train a lot, train hard, but you do not have enough time to recover in terms of sleep and rest and proper recovery with timing your food, then that also causes interferes with immune functioning, and usually will push you towards the latter scenario I mentioned, where you have poor innate immunity, poor barrier function, but greater chronic inflammation. And if you are ill, so if you run some sort of mild illness, cold, something like that, light training is actually fine within reason. So there's no reason not to be physically active or move if you have an infection, but only if you can handle it. So I'm not telling you that if you're running a 41°C fever with pneumonia, you should get out of bed and train. That, of course, would be insane. But light training and light movement can actually help you if you have a mild cold, if you have a mild chest infection, or you're sort of almost finished with the flu. But on the other hand, do be careful not to go right from being ill to train really, really hard, especially if you train outdoors. You really want to manage whether you get too cold or not, because if you get too cold or too chilled, then that could make the infection come back or prevent you from clearing it properly. But light training can be fine as long as it's within reason. What about supplements then? So there are supplements that are relevant, but do remember supplements cannot replace the initial things. So if you're eating an atrocious diet, not getting enough sleep, you're highly stressed, and you either do not train at all or you're overtraining. You do this back and forth where you train really hard, 3-4 sessions in a row, and then you feel as if someone cut you in two with a chainsaw, so you can do nothing for the next week or so, and then you go back to training hard. All those things, they really have to be in place, otherwise supplements will not be that much of a help. But there certainly are supplements and nutrients, and of course some of these nutrients can also be gained through food that are very important. So some of the nutrients that can actually help strengthen immunity and might help you clear an infection faster, prevent infections. I'd say certainly make sure you get a good multivitamin mineral to make sure you're covered with selenium, copper, iodine, iron, and manganese. So that would be a good idea as a baseline, not just when you get sick, but Make sure you get that. Even if you eat a very good diet, sometimes people aren't getting quite enough of these, and they're all important for immune function. Echinacea, depending on how you want to talk about it, can be effective both from a preventative point of view, also for treatment. We'll look closer at that. Vitamin D, certainly very important. So you probably need a supplement of that because you probably are not getting ideal amounts to a multivitamin mineral or through food. If you live in a very sunny climate, you might get enough. Zinc, also really important for your immune system, both in terms of being able to regulate clarification as to whether foreign molecules or foreign microbes are friend or foe, and for strengthening all your barriers, and also for making sure that your cellular immunity is strong. Probiotics, as a supplement on top of getting food that's full of beneficial gut bacteria, highly important if you get antibiotics, and you need to ideally start them before you go on antibiotics if they're necessary, but also for strengthening and modulating overall immune response. Vitamin A, important vitamin C, elderberry, and then there's this herb called Anthropophis paniculata, which actually has some rather good research. It's used a lot in Ayurvedic medicine, and all these adaptogens, ginseng, rhodiola, Siberian ginseng, Schisandra, astragalus. Let's have a closer look. As I said, but one thing for a baseline, you definitely want to make sure you're getting enough vitamin D. You want to make sure that you're getting a rich, nutrient-rich, diverse diet, but a multivitamin mineral would not be a bad idea either. So with vitamin D, you want to make sure that you get enough vitamin D that your blood levels are at least 100 nanomoles per liter, or about 50 nanograms per deciliter. So once vitamin D levels drop below that, then even though you might not be clinically deficient, you have to go somewhat lower than that, that would still be enough to interfere with immune functioning. So make sure that you get enough vitamin D to keep your blood levels that high, which is not really high, that's just the ideal range. Echinacea, interestingly, has not just a treatment effect, but actually seems to have a preventative effect. So the best studies on echinacea aren't showing an effect once you have a cold or have the flu and you start taking echinacea. They actually show a much better effect if you make sure that you take it morning and evening during late fall, winter, and early spring. So in studies in families where with children and parents and all these pathogens are passed around, if they actually took echinacea both morning and evening as lozenges, drops, or tinctures, and I'll tell you why it needs to be one of those in a moment, they could as much as decrease the occurrence or the number of days sick with these mild infections with as much as 50%. And the reason you want it as drops, a tincture, or lozenges is because you need physical contact with the mucous membranes in your mouth to actually strengthen your immune response. So echinacea works because some of the plant constituents you have in echinacea, they will trigger the innate immune response in all those surface areas, in all the barriers, and all the borders, so to speak. So they will make your immune system stronger and be enabled to respond much faster once they run into something that needs to be killed or cleared. So if you take echinacea as a capsule or a tablet, where the first point of contact with the surface area will be in your gut, so in your stomach, then you won't get the full effect because there'll be a protective effect, but you rarely get, like the cold doesn't affect your stomach, that's in your throat, that's in your mouth, oral cavity, right? And then probiotics, making sure that you have beneficial gut flora, actually also help, and adaptogens can help if you're under stress to increase the impairment in immune dysfunction during stress. So they can't completely nullify or cancel out the effect of stress, but the adaptogens like rhodiola, like ginseng and so forth, will actually have a slight protective effect. So they will also lower the rate of these basic upper airway respiratory infections in people who are under a lot of pressure, under a lot of stress, or if they're in very cold environments. So taking something like that could also be a benefit. If you then want an extra immune boost, either because you have a history of getting these infections, so you know that every winter there'll be sort of behave well in terms of diet and lifestyle, you still have a problem. You could get beta-glucans from yeast extract, so they will strengthen cellular immunity and innate immunity. So eating some sort of yeast extract would work. Vitamin C in amounts larger than one can eat also seems to have a beneficial effect, especially from a preventative point of view. So getting anywhere between 250 to 500 to 750 milligrams twice a day or even more times daily can actually strengthen immune response. And during an infection, the consumption, utilization, turnover of vitamin C in your immune system when your immune cells is quite high, so making sure you supplement with extra will help support it. So although if you look at the studies, it's sort of a bit of a mess. Usually those studies are a mess because not enough vitamin C was given to make a difference, or it was given once daily. See that I say twice or more times daily, because vitamin C, when given as a supplement, unless in some very specific forms that are not easily available, has a relatively short half-life. So if you give vitamin C as powder, as a tablet, as a capsule, and it's not in a food matrix, your blood levels might be decreased for 3, 4, maybe 5 hours, and then levels will come down again. Therefore, you need to dose often, so you have this continual effect. Otherwise, it will only give you a protective effect for a short part of the day. And that's the same reason with echinacea. If you want it as a preventative, you actually have to use it at least morning and evening, ideally also in the middle of the day. Natural vitamin A on top of what you might find in food and what you might create from all these colorful root vegetables could be an idea as well. So some cod liver oil is one source of vitamin A. An extra zinc, anywhere between 15 and maybe 50 milligrams a day at bedtime, can also help strengthen your immune system and barrier function. And then, as I mentioned, all these adaptogens, ginseng, astragalus, schisandra, rhodiola, Siberian ginseng, ashwagandha, and so forth. And they all seem to have the same effect. So choose one or choose a product with a mixture of those. If you then become ill, what might actually work to try to kill the infection? Garlic works. So some of the very stinky molecules in garlic are also antimicrobial. So eating lots of garlic, and if you eat it, crush it and eat it for 10 minutes, that will completely or fully unleash the antimicrobial potential. Or get garlic supplements, but not the odorless ones, because it's the odorless molecules in garlic that are really protected because they're antimicrobial. They're mild antibiotics, mild antimycotics. So if you get some of these aged garlic supplements that do not smell, they will have a beneficial effect on your heart, but they will not do as much for your immune system. Then there's Andrographis paniculata. I see there's a spelling there that seems to be the autocorrect in PowerPoint. But Andrographis paniculata, there are also studies showing that it will actually increase or shorten the time of illness if you use it. And elderberry extract has also been shown to increase the time of sickness or illness if you have cold, if you have the flu, or some sort of minor upper airway respiratory infection. So they can all help if you become ill. And then, if you are doing infections, if you're on antibiotics, you really want to make sure you take probiotics. Because once you're on antibiotics, there's no way around the fact that you will deplete your gut microbiome, you will kill some of the beneficial gut bacteria. And that holds not only for prescription antibiotics, but also a lot of these so-called natural antibiotics. So if you take golden seal extract, if you take large amounts of garlic products, if you take thyme, essential oils of thyme or oregano, and so forth, they will also deplete your gut microbiome. So I also see people say, but I only took sort of natural, non-prescription, herbal antimicrobials, antibiotics, so I shouldn't need probiotics. Well, yes, you will, because these things that kill bacteria, they will not be sort of, they kill rather indiscriminately. To make sure that if you have to take something to kill microbes, you get at least 10 billion CFUs daily, so that would be at least 10 billion living bacteria daily. At least it could be more. Make sure that they're acid resistant or enteric coated, so they won't die in stomach acid. You want to make sure you get a product that at least contains lactobacilli and bifidobacteria, both of them. And then there's Saccharomyces boulardii, which is actually a beneficial yeast that can be of benefit, especially if you tend to get yeast infections or you get a yeast infection during some sort of antibiotic treatment, because being a yeast that will not be killed by prescription antibiotics, but it will also help prevent colonization of some of the pathogenic yeasts. And then there's a growing movement towards looking at the whole group of bacteria called bacillus that are actually soil bacteria, and they might benefit as well. So I attended a really interesting lecture about the use of bacillus in bovine probiotics, so for cows and also for poultry, so like for turkeys, chickens, and also for pigs in animal husbandry. They showed some really interesting studies that if they take these bacillus that are not pathogenic ones, but some of the natural ones that you'll actually find in soil that can also get into our gut and our mucous membranes if we eat a lot of plants that are grown in nutrient-dense, nutrient-rich soil, they have pretty impressive protective effects. So in one study, they took bacillus and literally sprayed it into the nose of test monkeys, of lab monkeys, and then subjected them to the flu. And that was as effective as a flu vaccine when it works. And the protective effect lasted for a week, so they also seem to both protect their turf, so to speak, the mucous membrane or barrier they're situated in, and at the same time, they also will actually strengthen the innate immune response. And one way you could get bacillus is actually by beginning to eat your own fermented vegetables. So if you start making your own fermented vegetables with organic or biodynamic vegetables where there are some living soil bacteria left on them, that would probably include some bacillus you'll then get if you eat them. So, in conclusion, there are things you can do in terms of diet, nutrition, and lifestyle to strengthen your immune system. They are, that things that are possible. And it's not just about taking certain supplements and they will fix everything, although some of these things I mentioned, like making sure you get enough vitamin D, and I've forgotten which I should also mention, is that during infections your vitamin D requirements will increase because you lose more vitamin D as well. So if you have an infection for a while, even though you might have been taking vitamin D in levels that kept, amounts that kept blood levels normal under normal circumstances, it could very well be that you need more at least for a while after an infection or during some sort of infection. But there are things you can do on your own that relate to general health, and then there are some things that are immune specific. So if you do that and also think about hygiene and exposure and making sure that you're not constantly too cold or chilled, that should really decrease the number of days down and out due to basic infections during winter time, or if you train a lot and train hard. So now I guess it's time for questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Umahro, for enlightening us on what we can do to strengthen our immune system. Well, everyone that's listening in, you can type in your questions, and Umahro will be here for a few minutes to answer them for you guys. I know we have one question to start off. One of them is, besides obviously getting sick, coming down with colds easily, are there other signs that your body may be giving you that tell you that you might have a weak immune system?
Well, if you have continual problems with inflammation, then at least you know you're in a sort of situation. If you constantly have aches and pains everywhere that can't be explained by training too hard or changing to a new movement routine, that would be a sign that you have this chronic excessive inflammation, which with time can actually weaken your immune system. So if you have chronic systemic inflammation, and part of what might help show that is that you have these constant pains that really shouldn't be there, that will also strain or weaken your innate immune response over time. So if you have all these things where you think, I need extra fish oil to deal with my joint pains, extra turmeric, curcumin, and so forth, that could also end up being a situation where you will have a greater susceptibility to infections. So that's definitely worth looking out for. And of course, if you know you're sleep deprived, that would be a reason to really make sure you're covered in all these other areas and that you cover your bases, because that will increase your disease susceptibility. But you might be able to nullify or compensate for that by then being really good with everything else. The same thing if you're highly stressed, you might be under pressure because of work, you have to finish exams or finish a report, so there's a week where you know you're under pressure, then at least make sure that you're really being really good and not naughty in all these other areas to compensate.
Great. We have a question from Martin, and he's asking, what would you recommend someone with high stomach acid issues? So I'm guessing that's in relation to food and supplements.
Well, okay, if there's too much stomach acid, so it's not really, it's a bit off immune functioning, but we'll take it anyway. The first thing to consider if you have too much stomach acid is to actually try to suss out if there's something you're allergic or intolerant to, because part of what triggers the production of stomach acid will be histamine. And histamine is the messenger molecule you produce when you have these allergic reactions or when you have intolerance. So Cambridge University Hospital have a highly successful program for people with too much stomach acid, and what they will do is they put them on a strict elimination diet for a month, and if people then get better, then we know, okay, there's something, one or more things they're eating that actually contributes to their high levels of stomach acid and reflux and gastroesophageal reflux disease, and then they reintroduce foods one by one or food groups one by one to see what triggers the overproduction of stomach acid. So that would be worthwhile. Something as simple as making sure you're not eating way too much salt can also be important, because stomach acid is actually hydrochloric acid. So when you have a lot of salt, which is sodium chloride, that can actually initiate or push the production of stomach acid if there happens to be too much. So I'm not saying a no salt diet, but eating less salt sometimes solves the problem. Stress, you need to deal with that, because stress will actually push the production of stomach acid. That would also include using too many stimulants, so getting too much caffeine, whether that would be through coffee or caffeine supplements or Red Bull and Spark and Joel and Monster and Dynamite, whatever, all these caffeine-enriched energy drinks. So that would be worth looking at. And then in some instances, even though people think they have too much stomach acid, the problem is actually that they have too little. So if you have too little stomach acid, you can still get reflux, because stomach acid is supposed to literally sterilize your stomach. So what happens when you produce too little stomach acid is that food will go into your stomach, it will not be sterile, so there will be bacteria and yeast in there, not an infection, but just what you find in your general environment or your digestive tract. And imagine if you have food, especially carbohydrates, that goes into your stomach, it sits there for hours at body temperature with lots of oxygen. Now that's definitely an environment that will lead to fermentation. And what's the end product or byproduct of fermentation? That's organic acids. I mean, how do you create vinegar? What do you do when you make wine? You let either bacteria or yeast ferment carbohydrates at high temperatures with lots of oxygen available. So in some instances, people who get GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease, and so forth, they actually produce too little stomach acid, and then whenever they eat, especially if they get carbohydrate-rich foods, then they do get some acids, but they're not stomach acid, they're the acids produced by fermentation in their gut. That usually comes with them also getting very distended and very bloated shortly after meals. In that instance, you'd actually have to take a supplement of stomach acid or figure out why the production is low, what has interfered with it or impaired it.
We have time for 2 more questions. We have one from Robert, and he is asking, is it possible to cover my daily dose of vitamin C with just food, and maybe a recommendation on which foods and how much to eat of them?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can certainly get enough vitamin C if you're healthy and you're not an elite athlete through food. But if you were to do that, you'd probably have to eat a couple of citrus fruits, so a couple of lemons or oranges or tangerines or grapefruits or limes. And on top of that, get plenty of berries. They also tend to be rich in vitamin C. And actually, a lot of the cruciferous vegetables are rich in vitamin C. So things like broccoli, kale, white cabbage, red cabbage, spring cabbage, Nebbiolo cabbage. They're right. Also cauliflower, which is a type, same family, cruciferous family, that a cruciferous vegetable. They're quite rich. Peppers, so like bell peppers, are quite rich in vitamin C. So if you were to eat plenty of those every day, that should probably cover your basic needs. But my clinical experience is once we get into people who are top-level athletes, even if they eat that and you do blood testing, they're not saturated, so they still benefit from additional vitamin C supplements. And then, but that's for elite athletes, where we're talking a different ballgame. But if you were to do that, at least that should, unless there's something else going on physiologically, should keep you covered. Again, if you're under a lot of stress, that can also increase your demands for vitamin C. And there are some really interesting studies on vitamin C supplementation and stress response, both in animals and in humans. So in humans, there are studies, most of them done in Germany, where if you give people a few grams of vitamin C a day in divided doses, but a few grams in total, they actually perform better both physically and mentally under stress. And their recovery time back to normal when you look at immune function, when you look at blood pressure, when you look at their pulse, when you look at the perfusion, so blood flow, and the production of adrenaline and so forth, and cortisol also returns back to normal then faster. But to get those sorts of effects, you actually need to supplement with vitamin C. That's above and beyond what you can get through diet. But you should get it through diet, and also what we can see is when people get plenty of vitamin C through food and have it distributed throughout the day in meals and snacks, they have a better steady state of vitamin C in the bloodstream. So some of these accessory nutrients you find in vegetables and berries and fruits that are rich in vitamin C help prolong the life of the vitamin C you get. But there might still be instances where extra vitamin C would make sense. And just to finish that off with the research, there are some really brilliant, but in some ways also rather evil studies that have been done on vitamin C in animals. So in tests with mice and rats, you can do a test that's called simulated drowning. Rather sinister, actually. So you take these lab animals, you throw them into a tank with water where they can't get out of. So they'll, of course, keep on swimming until they give up, either because mentally they just give up, or physically they can't go any longer. And then in studies with rats and mice, if they were given vitamin C in doses that would be the equivalent to taking a couple of grams of vitamin C a day for a grown-up human being, they actually extended the time until they gave up, either mentally or physically, by 30%. Of course, they're not allowed to drown, so when they give up, then someone will grab them and get them out of the water, but they do not know. So by giving them vitamin C in amounts where their tissues were fully saturated, they were able to go for an additional third before they physically or mentally and neurologically couldn't go any longer. And their return to baseline, so their recovery, was also about 30% faster. So that's interesting.
Wow, yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah. That, of course, doesn't mean that you can then just take vitamin C and subject yourself to completely unreasonable work stress and you'll be fine. But there's something interesting going on there with stress response, and also with the suppression of immune function during and after stress.
Definitely. Well, we have one last question from Lisa. She's asking if there's been any research showing that a woman has different needs in terms of vitamin C and your immune system, especially due to their hormonal cycle, and if they need to adjust supplements or alter their diet because of it.
Women probably, they do not have, in terms of vitamin C, there doesn't seem to be a greater requirement. So for women, no, not so much. Also not based on where they're in their menstrual cycle. Although you might find that women who experience problems with inflammation around the time of menstruation. So some women, when they menstruate, they'll get more inflammation. They'll feel as if they're actually running a slight fever. They could benefit from taking vitamin C and also greatly increasing their intake of all these anti-inflammatory, antioxidant nutrients. Start with food, so drink more vegetable juice, eat more berries, eat more root vegetables, eat more onion family vegetables, cruciferous vegetables, and so forth. But if that's not enough, you can always try supplements. So I have women in my clinical practice where we will actually give them vitamin C during their menstrual period because they feel that helps alleviate some of the problems they might be experiencing. But in general, I wouldn't say that women have to take more vitamin C than men based on body weight. Not really.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much, Umahro, for helping us learn how we can strengthen our immune system. These have been great tips, especially as we're still kind of in the midst of flu season. For all those listening, you can follow Umahro on Instagram at Umahro for even more health tips. And if you want even more questions answered about immunity, feel free to check out the Pure Pharma blog. We have several blogs that are related to immune system. If you go to the right-hand side, you'll see that there are tags that are tagged as immunity and inflammation and so on. So thank you for joining us. You'll be getting an email in the next week or so with a recording of this webinar. And feel free to reach out to us on social media to let us know what you want to hear about next and for our next webinar. Thanks.